Chapter 261. Jagan 1. After sending Rhaenyra back, Eugene hid in the shadows of the Dragon Demon Castle. He was unable to secure legitimate accommodations, so he decided to hide in the shadows of the Dragon Demon Castle, keeping a watchful eye on the situation as it developed. As Eugene settled into his hiding spot, he realized that this was his chance to gather more information. He had already conducted a thorough investigation on the Dragon Demon Castle, so he knew that only a select few from Carabloom were privileged enough to call it home. With this in mind, Eugene kept a keen eye out for any signs of activity. He wanted to gather as much intel as possible to better understand the situation at hand and determine the best course of action moving forward. Eugene was well aware that only the elite of Carabloom's demon folk population was granted the privilege of living within the walls of the Dragon Demon Castle. That arrogant lizard Rhyzakia was known to be obsessed with privilege and exclusivity, and Eugene suspected that the group Rhyzakia had handpicked to call themselves the noblesse were even more distinguished than the average resident of the castle. Eugene's observations of the Dragon Demon Castle's residents came as a surprise to him. Despite their privileged status, they seemed far from the elite group he had expected. In fact, they appeared much like Inspector Bud, lazy and content in their peaceful surroundings. Without Rhyzakia's iron-fisted rule to keep them in check, the demons of the Dragon Demon Castle had become complacent and lethargic over the centuries. Eugene could sense that they had grown fat and corrupt, relying on their status and isolation to shield them from any potential threats. The demon folks residing here did not have to worry about experiencing any inconveniences or having to struggle to maintain their livelihood. In their stead, the demon folks of Carabloom were laboring hard, and they dared not rebel because of Rhyzakia's lingering shadow. As Eugene continued observing the castle's residents, he realized that the corrupt and lazy state of the Dragon Demon Castle was not entirely their own doing. A significant factor that contributed to their downfall was the fact that it was a dukedom with no human population to provide life force for tax collection. However, Rhyzakia was still one of the three dukes, so Pandemonium sent more than enough life force to the Dragon Demon Castle on a regular basis. Although Rhyzakia hated humans, he didn't hate killing and eating humans. He understood that he could not reject the life force of humans if he wanted to develop his strength as a demon and a demonic dragon. Nevertheless, Rhyzakia had a greater plan in mind. He sought to strengthen himself through his descendants, compromising his pride and aesthetics for the sake of his future goals. Meanwhile, even though the Mad Dragon had long disappeared, Babel continued to send human life force, which fattened up the demons of the Dragon Demon Castle. Their dark power is great, but that's about it. They're literally nothing more than fattened pigs. It had been the same with Bud. Even though he had been quite absurdly weak, his regenerative power had been formidable, allowing him to survive for quite a long time in the infinite purgatory. It meant that Bud had possessed quite a bit of dark power, but he had been limited to using it only for regeneration. Dark power wasn't an absolute measure of a demon's strength. In the end, what was more important was how they could handle the power and apply it. In this respect, the demon folks of the Dragon Demon Castle were pigs practically waiting to be devoured by other demon folks, if not for the protection that Rhyzakia's name granted them. "Behold!" exclaimed Rhaenyra. "This lady is the only blood of the Black Dragon. Her name is Rhaenyra. You humble and meek demons of the Dragon Demon Castle, show your admiration and praise for this lady." So the parade began at the gates, with Rhaenyra standing tall on a fancy carriage and declaring her majestic presence to all. The demons on the streets cheered and clapped for Rhaenyra. Their voices rose in a chorus of praise for the descendant of their great and powerful ruler, the Black Dragon. Eugene's expression was one of disbelief as he watched this scene unfold from the rooftop of a nearby building. What the hell were these idiots doing? He couldn't fathom why these individuals were acting so recklessly, given the imminent threat of war looming over them. Furthermore, why was Rhaenyra, that demented little girl, screaming like an idiot now even though it had seemed like she understood what he had been saying earlier? Mare let out a disgruntled sigh. Her pouty lips gave away her irritation when she poked her head out from under Eugene's cloak. "I knew it," she grumbled. "We should have just killed her when we had the chance." Mare found Rhaenyra to be quite vexing and unbearable, albeit for reasons that she herself couldn't quite explain. Was it because Rhaenyra was the daughter of the Black Dragon, the creature responsible for attempting to kill Mare's beloved Lady Sienna? Partially, Mare knew it wasn't right to hold the Black Dragon's daughter accountable for her father's sins, but it was hard to always remain rational. So, that wasn't the only reason. Mare was conscious of the fact that Rhaenyra was similar to her in age, as well as the fact that both resembled a child in appearance. Moreover, Rhaenyra had been confined to her palace, just like how Mare had been trapped in Akron. Even though Eugene acted like a bully and cursed at every chance he got, Mare knew that he wasn't a bad person at heart. That was why he was going to take Rhaenyra without killing her. An enemy. Mare had been convinced that Rhaenyra would become her enemy, her rival, since their first encounter. "Mare, didn't I tell you not to say bad things?" said Eugene. "Sir Eugene, I don't think you're the one to talk. After all, you're the one who's always saying fuck this, bitch that." "And when did I say something bad?" retorted Mare. "You shouldn't recklessly say that we should kill someone. That's bad," said Eugene. "But you always say things like that, Sir Eugene," retorted Mare. "It's fine for me since I'm a bad person by nature," responded Eugene. "I don't know if you are a bad person, but what I do know is that you are a shameless person who doesn't want to even yield a single inch to a child in an argument." 100 different rebuttals came to mind, but Eugene didn't bother to voice any of them. Regardless of what he said, he would only become someone who refused to lose to a child, just as Mare said. Eugene couldn't have that. Even so, he had to say one thing in response: "But you're older than me." As Eugene's words sank in, Mare fell silent and her previously grumbling demeanor became subdued. The two of them sat in quiet contemplation, watching the noisy parade below with solemn expressions. Hours passed by, and the march continued well into the dawn when the raucous parade finally came to a halt. As the child made her way back to the Dragon Demon Castle, the gates closed shut behind her. The once energetic demons who had been waving and shouting with great enthusiasm fell silent at the sudden closure of the gates. Now, with expressionless faces, they dispersed and went about their own business. Eugene saw everything from the rooftop. It seemed that most of the demon folks who were returning to their respective homes were preparing to leave, or rather, escape. He couldn't help but sneer in contempt as he watched the scene below. The parade had given the impression that the entire Dragon Demon Castle was united in their loyalty to their new leader, but now it was evident that they were all complicit in the conspiracy against Rhaenyra. "It is a little pitiful," murmured Mare as she watched the streets undergo a rapid change. She couldn't help but feel a little sorry for Rhaenyra, even though she harbored a dislike for the hatchling. Eugene silently ruffled Mare's hair and then turned around. "Where are we going to sleep?" asked Mare. "The back street," answered Eugene. "Well, I actually don't care where we sleep. After all, it'll be you who has to sleep on the bare ground, Sir Eugene. I'll be sleeping comfortably in your arms." "You mean the bed inside the cloak?" "You got it." Mare jumped back into the cloak with a giggle. Eugene proceeded to find a place to sit in a deserted alley. He knew he wouldn't have to worry about getting caught, but he wanted to be prepared for any unexpected situations before he could find any rest. The following day arrived, and much to Eugene's mixed emotions, he remained unseen by anyone. The Helmuth he had known from 3 centuries ago had been a living nightmare, a place of unspeakable terror and death. In comparison, the Dragon Demon Castle seemed like a mere pigsty with no real concerns or worries. Eugene felt both relieved and disappointed by this realization. Couldn't they just break into the castle and smash the core without even having to go to war? "I don't think anything will happen even if I kidnap Rhaenyra right now." It was to the extent that Eugene seriously pondered if he should just take Rhaenyra away. Of course, he would encounter many problems if he wanted to implement his plan right away. So he decided to survey the situation for about a day and look for an opportunity to infiltrate the Dragon Demon Castle. And if it looks like it could be easily infiltrated, well then I'll give it a try. And if I manage to sneak in without anyone noticing, then should I look for the core first? She said it was in the basement, so... Or I could go straight to those 4 divine general bastards and fuck them up. Eugene pondered many possibilities while proceeding with gathering intel once again. After some time it was past noon, but still quite a few hours before the sun would set. Eugene remained alert, never dropping his guard for even a moment. Despite being in a pigpen surrounded by individuals who posed no real threat to him, he knew better than to let his guard down in enemy territory. His past experiences had taught him to be cautious and not make foolish mistakes. Consequently, he became aware of an overwhelming sense of malice looming in the distance. an intent to kill so fierce that it left no room for negotiation or diplomacy. This wasn't just hostility but an unadulterated desire to snuff out all life in its path. It was a monstrous and all-encompassing force, not born of any specific enmity or grudge but rather a pure and simple thirst for blood. Eugene couldn't ignore it, not for a moment. He was unfamiliar with such a feeling. At least he had never felt such a great and unconditional murderous intent during his life as Eugene Lionheart. As soon as Eugene noticed the feeling, he unknowingly turned his gaze toward the source of the murderous intent. The sky seen from inside the Dragon Demon Castle wasn't murky even though the castle was covered by a giant barrier. However, the barrier was definitely there. It allowed the Dragon Demon Castle to stand as an inviolable, impenetrable fortress while controlling the climate and temperature inside the barrier to make it as pleasant as possible for the castle's residents. The draconic barrier had been designed and manifested by Raizakia himself, and it was maintained by the mana in the atmosphere, the Dragon Demon Castle's core and Rhaimyra's red jewel and dragon heart. The barrier also drew from the mana of the castle's demons. It could well be considered one of the most formidable barriers Eugene had ever seen. Eugene sensed the ever-increasing presence of a murderous force drawing closer, and he didn't turn a blind eye to it. Instead, he focused his attention on the direction from which the threat approached. Despite the distance between him and the source of the malevolence, Eugene could see a blurry figure hurtling through the air toward the castle. Seeing this, Eugene remained vigilant and unflinching in the face of danger. It was an unfamiliar figure, someone Eugene was seeing for the first time. Nevertheless, Eugene recognized the figure upon seeing him, or rather, the moment Eugene felt the figure's killing intent. There was only one existence who would launch an ambush against the Dragon Demon Castle. More importantly, Eugene could feel a barbaric, beastly energy emanating from the invader's malice. It was Jagan. Jagan had effortlessly launched himself from the ground below, soaring high into the air. He didn't need to rely on platforms or wings to accomplish such a feat. His strength was enough. To him, the jump was nothing out of the ordinary. A simple flex of his legs followed by a powerful launch into the sky. He quickly reached a height overlooking the entirety of the Dragon Demon Castle. Even the residents of the Dragon Demon Castle, who were fattened pigs just waiting to be slaughtered and whose minds were blurred by the years of peace, couldn't help but notice the overwhelming malice nearing the castle. As such, numerous demons looked up at the sky with surprised expressions. Meanwhile, Jagan's dark eyes only saw countless morsels of meat. He was disappointed that his prey did not reek of meat and blood, but his heart was filled with joy at the thought of the slaughter and feast that would soon take place. Now was the time to remove the lid from the plate. It was time to unleash the full extent of his power. Jagan drew back like a taut bow, ready to unleash a devastating attack. His arms swelled up greatly. Although Jagan was still tiny compared to the size of the Dragon Demon Castle, he looked like a giant in the eyes of those looking up at him. It seemed as if Jagan would swallow the castle in one bite. Jagan struck the barrier with both his fists. Boom! As soon as he made contact, the Dragon Demon Castle rumbled, and the powerful barrier failed to stand up to Jagan's blow. The transparent appearance of the barrier became murky, and a crack began to spread from where Jagan's fists had made contact. Hee hee, Jagan laughed, his lips twitching. Then he raised his arms once more. Since the barrier was already broken, he no longer needed to concentrate all of his strength on one place. If left as it was, the barrier would surely collapse on its own. Nevertheless, Jagan did not want to wait any longer, so he struck down with all his might. Rumbly! His two fists broke the barrier and the Dragon Demon Castle lost a bit of altitude. However, it did not crash to the ground. Even though the barrier had shattered, the core of the Dragon Demon Castle was still intact. Crazy bastard, Eugene commented. He had expected Jagan to come charging in like an idiot, but he had not expected Jagan to come rushing in only a day after the beginning of the war. Eugene was astonished and dumbfounded, but he wasn't overwhelmed by Jagan's malice and presence. On the contrary, Eugene was glad Jagan had chosen to invade like an idiot. The whole of the Dragon Demon Castle was instantly thrown into chaos, and everyone started running for their lives while screaming. The first to invade was Jagan, but he wasn't alone. The beast folk mercenaries, subordinate to Jagan, and the soldiers of Count Carrot appeared above the Dragon Demon Castle as well. Since they could not leap such a height like Jagan, all of them were on the backs of flying demonic beasts. There were quite a few kinds of flying demonic beasts that Eugene recognized. A giant demon who looked to be Count Carrot raised his hand, and the demonic beasts who resembled clumps of bumpy flesh spread their jaws wide. Boom! A beam of light was released from the maws of the demonic beasts, and their attack landed exactly on their target. The tightly shut gates of the Dragon Demon Castle collapsed under the bombardment of the demonic beasts. The creatures then proceeded to descend to the city, and the beast folk, who were just as short-tempered as their leader, leaped off the creatures and charged into the city on foot. Meanwhile, Jagan had already caused several buildings to collapse. He was tearing all the demons in his vicinity to shreds and shoving their flesh, bones, and blood into his mouth. It didn't matter whether they were trying to retaliate, running away screaming in terror, or pathetically collapsing on the spot. They were all prey. Eugene ignored all of this. It was none of his business whether all the demons in the Dragon Demon Castle died. Moreover, he didn't feel a need to fight against Jagan right now. His priority at the moment was to secure Rhaenyra, the Dragon Duchess. What is going on? The Dragon Demon Castle. What has happened to this lady's castle? Rhaenyra's voice resonated from inside Eugene's pocket. It was coming from the portal communication device that Eugene had given the girl yesterday. Eugene placed the communicator in his ear before responding. "Where are you? Did you say? Where are you? Don't move a muscle and wait for me there." Wings of flames erupted from Eugene's back. He was using prominence to accelerate to his limit. This lady is currently at the throne of the Dragon Demon Castle, which should be the highest, most splendid place. Wah. Rhaenyra began to sniffle. Not wanting to hear her sobs, Eugene turned off the device. Then a purple bolt of lightning weaved over the ruins of the gate. Chapter 262, Jagan 2. Rhaenyra had been looking forward to ending today as a perfect, beautiful, and historical day. Last night, Rhaenyra had imprinted her noble figure on the people of the Dragon Demon Castle with a splendid march, one that was as great as the greatest of carnivals. Then today she began her first day as the Deputy Lord of the Dragon Demon Castle. She spent her day sitting on the throne at the top floor of the Dragon Demon Castle, receiving the vassals of the castle one by one and accepting their welcome. After accepting the vassals' greetings, Rhaenyra turned her attention to the reports on the happenings of Dragon Demon Castle. Although she didn't fully comprehend their contents, it was evident to her that they were mere formalities, lacking any significant importance. Left with little to do, Rhaenyra sat on the throne, nodding along as she listened to the formal reports. Even this small gesture filled her with joy and pride, as she had relished the opportunity to sit on the throne and leave behind her secluded life in the palace. Throughout the day, Rhaenyra received vassals, listened to reports, and ate her meals. She even took a stroll around the castle. As the day wore on, she planned to once again ride through the streets in her flowery carriage, similar to the previous day. Rhaenyra wanted to ensure that everyone in the castle had the opportunity to witness her splendid march, in case anyone had missed it the day before due to unavoidable circumstances. As the Deputy Lord, it was crucial for Rhaenyra to make her presence known to everyone in Dragon Demon Castle. In fact, it was imperative that she left an ineffaceable mark as the Dragon Duchess. To achieve this, she knew that she had to stage a march that was even more magnificent and livelier than that of the previous day. It was absolutely necessary, no questions asked. Spreading her name far and wide was of utmost importance to her, and Rhaenyra was determined to achieve it. However, it was right at the very moment when she was talking about another march that the barrier of the Dragon Demon Castle was shattered. A unit of flying demonic beasts led by Count Carrot smashed open the gates of the castle, and a number of beast-folk mercenaries were running rampant in the city, causing chaos and destruction in their wake. "What should this lady do?" asked Rhaenyra while clutching the armrest of the throne and shrinking back. From the throne, she could clearly make out the confusion and agitation in the expressions of the vassals. "No way. This cannot be." The one who muttered with a look of disbelief was one of the 4 divine generals, the one responsible for foreign affairs. He waved his hand in the air, and the Dragon Demon Castle system showed a view of the streets. It was truly awful. Buildings lay in ruins, and the streets were destroyed beyond recognition. Though no intact bodies were visible, the scattered bloodstains and fragmented bones hinted at the gruesome fate suffered by the castle's inhabitants. "What happened to the barrier?" asked Rhaenyra. It's been completely destroyed. It should take at least an hour for it to restore itself, responded one of the other 4 divine generals. What is the point of restoring the barrier when the enemy has already invaded? Do we not have an intercept system in place? Asked Rhaenyra. We do not have such magic, muttered the war general. The Secretary General's voice was the next to echo through the chamber. It was evident he felt frustrated as he turned to the war general and spat. The protection of the Dragon Demon Castle falls to you. So, why are you sitting here while our soldiers and demonic beasts are out there facing the enemy? What kind of leader are you? The 2 men were both members of the 4 divine generals, and they had some mutual loyalty to each other. Nevertheless, their loyalty to each other meant little at this moment. All that mattered was their own survival. The war general's face twisted into a scowl at the words of the other general. It was an undeniable fact that the war general had once been the strongest among the 4 divine generals, but 300 years of peace had dulled his skills. He couldn't even recall the last time he had fought in a real battle or competition, and the memories continued to fade with each passing year. In fact, he couldn't even remember how he had fought in the past. This ambush is too sudden, too unexpected. Our army is not prepared at all. So it would be best for our lord to step forward and persuade the enemy commander, suggested the war general. What on earth are you talking about? They have already destroyed the barrier and they are slaughtering everyone in the city. They've already broken through the gates, shouted the Secretary General, his voice urgent and filled with panic. Isn't he getting too into it? The war general couldn't help but take on a dumbfounded expression upon hearing the Secretary General's frantic words. The original plan had been to offer all the riches of the Dragon Demon Castle and the Dragon Duchess to Count Carrot. The 4 divine generals had been planning to leave for Helmuth's resorts under the tacit protection of Count Carrot, with the guarantee that their possessions would remain untouched. Finance General, what is going on here? Didn't you say that you showed enough sincerity to Count Carrot? I don't know. I haven't heard anything about an ambush. Are you sure our lives are guaranteed? The Foreign Affairs General and Finance General spoke to each other in hushed tones. Their conversation was at a volume too low for the vassals in the lower seats to overhear. With voices now silenced by fear, the Foreign Affairs General and Finance General trembled in their seats. Rhaenyra found herself in the same predicament as the rest of them. The unidentified human intruder had been correct in his predictions, and Rhaenyra was at a loss as to how to proceed. She had never been trained to deal with such an unexpected situation. The intruder's words echoed in her mind, "Stay still." But for how long? How could she trust his words when she knew nothing about him? Rhaenyra was helpless as she watched the chaos unfolding on the streets, distressing scenes illuminated by the castle's surveillance system. The enemy's beastfolk mercenaries were drawing closer, pillaging the city as they advanced, while Count Carrot's forces rained down artillery fire from above. Rhaenyra could only bear witness to the destruction, unable to do anything to stop it. "My lady, now is the time for you to make a decision like a lord. Please make an honorable decision befitting the Black Dragon's blood." An honorable decision? What the hell was considered an honorable decision to be made at this moment, especially when she would die in a few days? The human intruder had said her death would be in a few days, but it had only been a day since he had warned her. "They'll most likely chop off your head and mount it on the Dragon Demon Castle's gate." That was no longer physically possible since the gates had already fallen, but Rhaenyra couldn't help but bring her hand to her neck while breathing heavily. "Or perhaps they'll impale you with a spoke through your crotch and put you on display in front of the gate." Was it even possible to die in such a gruesome way? Rhaenyra scrunched her legs closer together while biting her lips. "Maybe they'll opt to dismember you one limb at a time." Her teeth began to clatter. It's a brutal execution method favored by the Dark Elves. They force their victims to kneel, cut open their stomachs and pull out their intestines while they're still alive. Ugh. Rhaenyra's stomach started to throb with pain, and she whimpered with her hand cupped over her mouth. It was an undignified sight, truly unbefitting a dragon. Yet while she did so, the 4 divine generals and the other vassals had their eyes fixed on her. Conscious of their gazes, Rhaenyra cleared her throat and hurriedly stammered, "This lady is the lord of the Dragon Demon Castle. So she will do her due obligation and fulfill her duties." In spite of what she said, Rhaenyra had no intention of actually fulfilling her lordly duties, of course. Eugene was in complete agreement with Rhaimyra's plan. His intention was to take her out of the Dragon Demon Castle and bring her to the Samar Forest, not let her become involved in something stupid like her lordly duties. So he stormed in. Did not take long at all. Lightning Flash and Prominence made a great pair when it came to speed. In fact, this was the fastest Eugene could accelerate without using ignition. The vassals of the castle were caught off guard by Eugene's lightning-fast movements. Before anyone could even react, he had already appeared right in front of Rhaimyra, standing in plain sight for all to see. "Ah," Rhaimyra uttered. She had also failed to notice Eugene's presence until he was standing right in front of her. Rhaimyra had been so preoccupied with her own despair and fear of death, but as soon as Eugene appeared before her, everything changed. She jumped up from her throne, and her hand stretched out toward the blank-faced vassals, with her sleeves fluttering in the sudden movement. Rhaimyra laughed and said, "Ah, you disloyal vassals. This lady has no intention of dying with you pigs. Naturally, she will not give up her precious life for you disloyal morons." "Am my lady?" Rhaimyra's emotions boiled. With a crazed look in her eyes, she let out piercing laughter while shouting insults and curses. "Oh, you cursed castle that dared to restrain this lady. You pigs who call yourselves the 4 divine generals, you who tried to use me. Fall with this castle and return to the soil where you came from. Ha! Ahahaha." Her laughter continued as she suddenly jumped up and clung onto Eugene's arm. Eugene was taken aback by Rhaimyra's sudden clinginess, unsure of what to make of it. He instinctively shook her off, causing her to fall to the ground. Rhaimyra looked up at him with a mix of fear and confusion. Her eyes trembled as she tried to process what had just happened. Had he changed his mind? Was he planning to leave her behind to die? It was only for a short moment, but all kinds of horrible thoughts and despair crossed Rhaimyra's mind. "Get up," said Eugene. He wasn't feeling sympathetic toward Rhaimyra because of her quivering eyes. After all, he just didn't want her to hang on his arm. Eugene stretched out his hand toward Rhaimyra, and that alone brought focus back into her eyes. She took his hand with a sigh of relief. "Am I lady?" The 4 divine generals belatedly came to their senses and rushed toward Eugene and Rhaimyra. Whoosh! Eugene created a circle of fire using his ability Prominence. The 4 divine generals were unable to break through the intense surge of mana, the flames and currents of hot air that surrounded him. Eugene seized the opportunity to pull Rhaimyra into his embrace, holding her close to his chest. At the next moment, the vassals of the Dragon Demon Castle stared at the throne with stunned expressions. Although the current of hot air remained, they could no longer see the intruder and the Dragon Duchess anywhere. They couldn't have gotten far. "We must go after them right now and—" Wait. Let's leave the 2 of them and go to Count Carrot," said the Foreign Affairs General while raising both his hands. He had come to this decision since it seemed impossible to take the Dragon Duchess back from the intruder. The Foreign Affairs General knew that he and the other generals were fat and old, while the intruder seemed extremely skilled. Therefore, he thought it would be better to head to Count Carrot, inform him of the Dragon Duchess kidnapping, and ask him for a guarantee of their protection and rights. That is a good idea indeed. Even the Secretary General, who had been busy pretending to be loyal to the Dragon Duchess, nodded in agreement. "What are you all looking at? If you care at all about your lives, you'd better run away," shouted the War General when the other vassals looked at the 4 generals with resentful eyes. The survival of the other vassals and the residents of the Dragon Demon Castle was none of the general's business. "Kaya!" Rhaimyra let out a high-pitched scream as she felt her body being jolted by the sudden acceleration. It was a sudden acceleration that would have been intolerable for humans. In fact, the rate of acceleration was something that would be unbearable for most non-humans as well. Even Rhaimyra, a dragon hatchling, felt as if her whole body was being pummeled. Ack! As Rhaimyra's brief screams died off, Rhaimyra and Eugene came to a stop and were now standing in a hallway located far away from the throne room. Rhaimyra closed her mouth and looked up at Eugene, murmuring, "Ah." "We're going to the basement," said Eugene with a calm expression before taking the lead. He let go of Rhaimyra's hand and Rhaimyra followed behind him while caressing her stiff wrist. Why did you come so late? If you came even a little bit later, this lady would have been made into a sacrifice by those pigs," whined Rhaimyra. It wasn't anything worth responding to, so Eugene didn't even bother to glance back. However, Rhaenyra continued to speak while trailing his footsteps. She said, "This lady was scared because of your insensitive and ignorant behavior. This lady, the Dragon Duchess, is a dragon. To think that such a disgraceful thing happened. Why, you tell this lady how sorry you are for being late." Hearing Rhaenyra's continued whines annoyed Eugene, so he turned his head to glare at her. His fierce gaze made Rhaenyra instantly cup both of her hands over her mouth, and she broke out into a cold sweat while forcing an obsequious smile with her eyes. "The core is at the bottom of the Dragon Demon Castle. This lady will guide you there personally," said Rhaenyra. "I don't need you to. Just make sure you keep up," responded Eugene. He was approaching his destination so quickly wasn't simply because he had flown at full speed. During his reconnaissance of the castle, Eugene had made sure to spread the feathers of prominence everywhere. As a result, he was familiar with all the hallways and corridors of the Dragon Demon Castle, even though it was his first time here. If he were alone, Eugene could leap to the locations of the feathers. However, it was impossible to do so since he was with Rhaenyra. As such, Eugene located the path and gradually made his way down to the basement. The core of the Dragon Demon Castle wasn't particularly hidden since it was necessary to check for any abnormalities in the case of unexpected occurrences. However, it was quite a long distance down to the core. This was perhaps because it supported the huge castle and its landmass. It would take a long time to reach the core if he were to walk down the stairs. Nevertheless, Eugene didn't need to. He suddenly grabbed Rhaenyra's wrist and then jumped straight down to the bottom of the stairs. "Arg!" Rhaenyra shrieked. Eugene maintained his relentless speed, propelling him and Rhaenyra through the air. Rhaenyra hung limply in his grasp, her body swaying like a lifeless puppet. Crush. As soon as the two of them arrived at the bottom, Eugene mercilessly let go of her wrist, and Rhaenyra rolled on the floor several times due to the momentum of the fall. "Arm. This lady's arm," she screamed. There was nothing wrong with her arm, though. It wasn't broken, pulled, or dislocated. Her skin, flesh, muscles, and bones were still those of a dragon, even though she was in a human form. Nonetheless, her arm still hurt so much that Rhaenyra couldn't help but think it was broken or dislocated. "I really didn't want to say this, but kid, are you really a dragon?" asked Eugene. "Are you doubting the blood of this lady? This lady is the only flesh and blood of the Black Dragon." "That's what I'm saying. Why do you act like this when you're a proud dragon? You have no dignity and all you do is exaggerate," rebuked Eugene. Rhaenyra's lips curled down in displeasure as Eugene's words hit a nerve. She huffed and puffed while silently massaging her throbbing wrist. "You were too mean, Sir Eugene," said Mare after poking her head outside. "What do you mean I was too mean?" grumbled Eugene. "Unlike me, she never received any love or education from her creator. That's why she's so stupid and undignified. That's why she exaggerates so much too," responded Mare. "You little rat-like creature. Are you daring to make fun of this lady, the only child of the Black Dragon? This lady who is a dragon, the progenitor of magic," argued Rhaenyra. "I don't know what there is to be proud of in being the child of the Black Dragon," Mare sneered. "But you seem so glad to be the daughter of that crazy Black Dragon. I don't know why you feel so proud when you're being grown to be eaten like a chicken." "What are you talking about?" asked Rhaenyra with a confused look. Eugene had been planning to ignore their childish argument, but he shot a glance at Mare when she mentioned the latter part. "I'm sorry," grumbled Mare while pouting. Eugene gave her a slight nod and then turned his attention to the core in front of him. The object in front of them was a massive sphere made entirely of pure gold. Its surface was smooth and polished, almost like a mirror with very little impurities visible. The sphere was easily as big as a mansion. "Crazy bastard," muttered Eugene. Gold was a highly conductive metal for mana. However, it was inefficient compared to materials like mithril and orichalcum, and it was too malleable to be used in making weapons or armor. Yet it seemed that such things had not mattered to Rhysakia. Since ancient times, dragons had been known for their love of shiny gold. Naturally, as a dragon, Rhysakia was naturally drawn to gold as well. He was also known to enjoy flaunting his wealth. Eugene could easily envision how the large and smooth sphere had been constructed, given that Rhysakia had a substantial number of dwarves under his command. The Black Dragon had likely devoured some of the dwarves to set an example. Then the remaining dwarves would have given in to his demands for their fear of death, creating a perfect sphere of gold that would brilliantly capture Raizakia's magic. The sphere was tightly engraved with the inscriptions of Raizakia's magic. Eugene slowly reached for the core. It was an awe-inspiring object of magic. If he could bring it back to Aroth, it would surely earn him a spot on the high floors of Akron. Nevertheless, he had no intention of doing so. Before Eugene knew it, the argument between the two children was over, and Rhaenyra hesitated before speaking to Eugene from behind him. She eventually asked, "How long are you going to stay like that?" Boom. Boom. The vibrations from above were becoming gradually stronger, indicating that the battles that had begun in the distance were now nearing the Dragon Demon Castle. As this lady said yesterday, unless you break the core, it will be impossible for this lady to leave the Dragon Demon Castle. "Why, you must destroy the core right now and get us out of here," said Rhaenyra. Eugene didn't answer and continued to gaze at the core. Boom. Dust began to fall from the ceiling, accompanying a heavy explosion. Oof. Rhaenyra felt as if the blood circulating through her body was vibrating in unison with the explosions. She parted her lips while shivering and spoke again. "Look, intruder. This lady is starting to get a little scared. Why are you standing so still? Don't tell me. Is it impossible for you to break the core? Did you decide to run away by yourself and abandon this lady? Was it impossible to break the core?" No, it was entirely possible. The sphere was exquisite and well-crafted, but it wasn't something that Eugene couldn't destroy with the Moonlight Sword. The reason Eugene was standing still was that he was seriously contemplating something. "Sir Eugene," called out Mare after recognizing Eugene's concerns. She shook her head with a discontent expression. "Even if you don't take into consideration the trouble you'll get into later, should you be doing something like that? Morgiabella won't kill me right away. Rather, she would be even more joyous if she comes to know who I am. She will try to make things convenient for me for the sake of the future," Eugene replied with a subtle change in tone. Hearing that, Mare knew well that the current Eugene was closer to Hamel Dynas, the stupid Hamel. This meant she couldn't hope to persuade him in his current state. "I only saw him for a moment, but Jagan sure is a dangerous bastard," muttered Eugene with a nod. Fwoosh. His mana burst into form as a purple flame. "So, I'm going to kill him before I leave." Chapter 263, Jagan 3. There was a faint disturbance in the air. It was a presence that unsettled Jagan. Yet he hesitated. It piqued his curiosity slightly, but he did not bother immediately rushing toward it. After all, it was probably just the hatchling. Although he had no personal experience with dragons, Jagan knew that dragons emitted a unique, daunting energy called fear. So, Jagan presumed the bothersome energy was just dragon fear. Even so, he took his sweet time heading to the Dragon Demon Castle. After all, there were many pleasures to enjoy on the way there. Jagan reveled in the thrill of the hunt, showing no mercy to his prey. Some tried to fight back, others ran for their lives, and a few simply collapsed, wailing in terror. He relished every moment of the slaughter, giving each of his victims the attention they deserved. Each demon folk was different and their taste varied, but Jagan enjoyed them all the same. He ate and drank to his heart's content, but no matter how much he consumed, his hunger and thirst were never satiated. Nevertheless, it was fine as long as the hatchling didn't run away. No, on second thought, it would be fine as well even if she did run away. A wicked grin spread across Jagan's face as he considered his next move. He had been eagerly awaiting this moment, the chance to kill Rhaenyra, the Dragon Duchess, and the blood of Raizakia, the Black Dragon. Jagan knew that a fierce struggle was not in the cards, as it was clear that a 200-year-old hatchling would not provide him with the entertainment he craved. However, an idea struck him then. What if he let her run? The thought of chasing her down and relishing in the hunt twice over sent a shiver of excitement down his spine. Yes, he decided that it would be rather special and fun. Suddenly, Jagan came to an abrupt halt. Up until that moment, he had been strolling along at a leisurely pace without a care in the world, but something had just caught his attention, causing him to freeze in his tracks. The energy he felt coming from the Dragon Demon Castle had suddenly changed. When he felt a sliver of it before, he had presumed it to be dragon fear. Yet, upon feeling it intensify now, it became clear to Jagan that his speculation had been incorrect. This wasn't anything like dragon fear. It was a simpler yet purer form of malice and killing intent that sent shivers down Jagan's spine. Who or what could be responsible for emitting such a potent aura? The hatchling, who was only 200 years old and had been confined to the castle all her life, couldn't possibly be the source of this intense energy. It was simply impossible. Then who was responsible for it? Could it be the 4 divine generals, the closest known aides of the Black Dragon? As far as Jagan knew, they had devolved into fat pigs during the 200 years of peace. Was it possible that the remnants of the past had not yet become entirely dull? Yo! The Deputy Lord. The Dragon Duchess has fled the castle. It was a mishap that had nothing to do with us. That sly girl secretly recruited a collaborator from the outside, prepared and implemented an escape without us knowing. She could not have gotten very far. You should hurry in. The generals scrambled to talk over each other, causing Jagan's lips to twitch upwards. Jagan leaned forward without bothering to listen any further. Boom. Then he simply leaped forward. However, even such a simple gesture was sufficient to create a shockwave that caused the bodies of the kneeling vassals to explode like water balloons. W8. The 4 divine generals attempted to flee in a hurry, but Jagan had already decided to kill them before they even had a chance to run away. None of them managed to escape from Jagan, just like the vassals who had died before them. They all perished without even putting up a fight or letting out a scream. Rumbly. Jagan moved past the railing where the generals had been standing and began climbing the roof of the castle. This caused the massive structure to collapse, but Jagan remained stable and unmoved even as the roof creaked and shook. He stood firmly on the collapsing roof, gazing out at the castle's back garden. In the back garden, a figure stood gazing up at Jagan, meeting his stare. The man had black hair and black eyes, but Jagan saw through the disguise immediately. Regardless, Eugene had no reason to maintain his disguise any longer, as he intended to kill anyone who laid eyes on him that day. With a few scruffles of his hand, his black hair transformed back into its natural gray hue, and his eyes regained their original golden color. Eugene knew the beastfolk staring at him was the son of Oberon. He had felt it upon seeing the beastfolk from a distance, but Oberon's son had a lot in common with his father. It was mostly his appearance, which was a mix of a bear and a human, as well as his grayish-brown fur, which was as stiff and sharp as iron needles. That wasn't the end of it, though. Oberon had been known for his violent tendencies, earning him the infamous title of the Depraved Oberon. However, as Eugene looked at Jagan and felt the intense killing intent emanating from him, Eugene couldn't help but feel that his father's nature paled in comparison. Eugene Lionheart? Muttered Jagan while slightly tilting his head. Gray hair and golden eyes were unchanged characteristics of the Lionheart family over 300 years of lineage. There were numerous families on the continent, but only one family with such prominent characteristics, the Lionheart family of Kiel. Even the farthest relatives of the family were born with distinct gray hair and golden eyes. Do you know who Barong is? Asked Eugene. He had left Rhaenyra back underground and leaped to a feather he had spread beforehand with prominence. Jagan's voice was low as he responded, I haven't heard that name in years. He paused for a moment, trying to remember the last time he had heard it. It had been a few years ago, but he couldn't recall any details. The name simply held no significance for him, and he felt nothing toward it. That bastard said that you were his sworn brother, said Eugene. We were, Jagan answered simply. The title of a sworn brother held little value for him, considering that he had killed his own father with his own hands. To Jagan, being a sworn brother was merely a recognition of one's strength and ferocity. A recognition of one's sharp fangs and claws, but nothing more. Was Barong proud of it? Jagan asked. Since a certain point in time, Jagan had no longer considered others to be his brothers. He had abandoned any sense of brotherhood around the time when he no longer considered his father to be his father. The depraved Oberon was considered a madman, and while Jagan had respected his father's strength, respect was only given to those who were stronger. With the passage of time, Oberon grew old and frail while Jagan grew strong and youthful. Once it became clear that Jagan's fangs and claws could reach the nape of his father's neck, he decided to no longer respect his father. The same was true for Jagan's sworn brothers. Since their fangs and claws did not grow as sharp as he had hoped, he lost all interest in them. Barong. Indeed, he had once been Jagan's sworn brother. Jagan's memories returned as he thought about it. He recalled that among his brothers, Barong had lived the longest and always claimed he would stand by Jagan's side, but that was all Jagan could remember. No, he wasn't very proud of it. Anyways, it's amazing that you actually were sworn brothers with him, commented Eugene. What's amazing about it? Asked Jagan. I thought he was selling your name because he didn't want to die, said Eugene with a grin. However, Eugene's words elicited no response from Jagan. Instead, Jagan simply stood motionless while staring down at him. Are you done? Asked Jagan. I have nothing more to say, Eugene replied shortly. With that, he brushed off his coat and transformed it back into the cloak of darkness. Though he had been compelled to wear the black coat with the fur lining, he had never felt comfortable in it. The cloak, on the other hand, was a familiar and reassuring garment. While Eugene was transforming his coat, Jagan didn't waste any time and quickly launched an attack toward him. He aimed his hand directly at Eugene's head with lightning-fast speed, ready to strike him down. Jagan was not one to show any consideration for his prey during a hunt. He typically wouldn't even bother conversing with them. However, in the case of Eugene, Jagan had a hunch that this battle would be enjoyable and exciting. So he waited patiently and engaged in a short conversation with the human, answering his questions. It was a level of consideration that Jagan wouldn't have given to most of his prey, but this hunt was different. The prospect of a challenging fight was too tempting to resist. Consequently, Jagan did not bother asking any of the important questions. Was Eugene the Dragon Duchess' collaborator? So where was she right now? Such questions were for Count Carrot to wonder about. Instead, Jagan had other questions of his own. How had Eugene dodged his attack just now? Eugene had definitely been right under Jagan, and he had remained motionless until the moment Jagan struck. Jagan wasn't arrogant enough to think his attack had been completely unavoidable. In fact, he was sure that there had been a gap. Yet he had failed to grasp Eugene's movements. It was strange. Jagan did not understand exactly how Eugene had suddenly appeared behind his back. Boom. With a small black dot on the end of his fingertip, Eugene launched an attack that consumed Jagan in an explosion, and the brilliant light burned the surroundings a blinding white. Then the explosion of mana condensed into a single point and blinked black, leaving nothing but darkness in its wake. Eugene took a step back from the great storm of mana. He hadn't been expecting his attack to leave a scratch on Jagan, so he wasn't disappointed when it didn't. After all, Eugene had known from his encounter with Oberon, Jagan's father, over 3 centuries ago that Oberon had been as tough as Molan, though not as strong as the Molan of today. So it came as no surprise that Jagan was just as tough, if not tougher, than his father. Then Eugene activated the Wings of Prominence, and the blazing flame underneath them caused a multitude of feathers to sprout forth. Whoosh! In an instant, a burst of light emitted from beneath the wings and propelled Eugene forward with such speed that he became a blur in Jagan's vision. Regardless, Jagan stretched out his hand and a curved claw shot out of his muscular hand. He then clawed at the space in front of him. Eugene reached for a weapon concealed within his cloak, but he didn't choose his usual sword. Instead, he drew out Jigalath, the Annihilation Hammer. This was the weapon he had acquired from Black Lion Castle, and it had once been wielded by the Demon King of Carnage himself. The hammer towered over Eugene's height, but he expected nothing less, considering its previous owner's stature was much greater than that of humans. Yet, despite the hammer's large size and great weight, Eugene was strong enough to wield it with only one hand. Indeed, it was true that it was rather hard for Eugene to put all of his strength into wielding the weapon with one hand, but the Annihilation Hammer was not a weapon meant to be swung with as much strength as possible. The Annihilation Hammer, Jigalath, was a straightforward weapon compared to the Demon's Spear. The Demon's Spear had a complex mechanism that involved attacking specific coordinates through space, but the Annihilation Hammer simply broke down anything it hit and caused the target to explode. Boom. Propelled by the force of the impact produced by Eugene's attack, Jagan's body moved forward. Nevertheless, he quickly regained his balance and lunged toward Eugene with his clawed hand outstretched. Yet as he tried to grab Eugene, Eugene disappeared once again. Jagan didn't grab empty air though. Instead, he found a swelling black dot that had been left behind where Eugene had just been. Jagan reacted quickly, immediately closing his fist around the black dot. He squeezed it tightly, extinguishing it before it could explode. The dot still exploded anyway, but it was only a partial explosion which caused Jagan's hand to jerk once. Right after that, Eugene materialized high up in the sky and brought down the Annihilation Hammer with great force, hitting Jagan hard. Nevertheless, Jagan didn't move. Instead, he faced the full impact of Jigalath's strike and raised his head to look at Eugene. A gleam sparkled in Jagan's black eyes. Eugene laughed as he felt a shiver run down his spine. Though Jagan was powerful, his strength couldn't be compared to that of Molan. Eugene knew he had boasted to Molan before about how their battle would have gone differently if he had weapons, but deep down, Eugene knew that he would still have lost even if he had been allowed his weapons. But Eugene's left hand was still tightly wrapped around the annihilation hammer. He placed his right hand, which was empty, into his cloak. Aren't Molan? Jagan had bitten his father to death, but so what? Oberon had not been stronger than Molan from 300 years ago. Eugene didn't deny that Oberon had been strong, but it was a fact that Molan had been stronger. Yes, it was true that Jagan was a powerful warrior, strong enough to earn him the nickname the Beast of Ravesta. However, Jagan wasn't Molan, he wasn't Gavid Lindman, and he wasn't Noor Giabella either. Still, it was also true that one day Jagan would grow strong enough to stand shoulder to shoulder with those monsters. Eugene was convinced of this after seeing Jagan run rampant. That was why he had bothered to make his presence known to Jagan. Eugene could have chosen to destroy the core of the Dragon Demon Castle and make his escape with Rhaenyra during the chaos of the castle's descent. A demon like Jagan wouldn't die from the crash, but the crash would still result in the deaths of many demon folks. Despite that, Eugene had pushed back this very exciting and cool opportunity for a while and decided to kill Jagan first. The first time Eugene put prominence to the test had been on the other side of Lehanjar, but that had not been the most optimal location to use prominence. Moreover, the only abilities he had utilized in the battle against Molan had been leaping from feather to feather and bombarding him with black spots. The other side of Lehanjar had been almost devoid of any mana, and there had been no primal spirits either. It was true that the ability to simply leap from feather to feather was an invaluable ability that made prominence worthwhile as Eugene's signature, but leaping wasn't the only thing he wanted to achieve with prominence. The feathers Eugene had scattered with prominence were imbued with his mana, which contained the spirit of the world tree. In turn, this attracted the primal spirits in the surroundings. Ultimately, Eugene's flame of mana gradually increased in size and intensity by devouring the mana in the atmosphere. Eugene's mind resonated with the mana and took fine control of the primal spirits as well. This was different from ignition in that doing this didn't cause his cores and heart to flare up. However, it did allow Eugene to control an enormous amount of dense mana that he would not normally be able to control. Consuming such a huge amount of mana would cause Eugene to be extremely fatigued, even though he had not neglected a single day in training. Nevertheless, that was fine. Since he wasn't using ignition and therefore not straining his heart and his core, he was only putting his body in physical pain that he could endure. Eugene's left ring finger lit up with a red glow from the Ring of Agaroth, the war god. Its ability was straightforward: to forcibly enhance the body's regenerative power. Although it consumed the user's life force, Eugene's exceptional physicality and rigorous training meant it would only cause mild fatigue after usage. The feeling of omnipotence began to spread throughout Eugene's body. It felt similar to using ignition but without the accompanying strain on his heart and core. With a smile, Eugene pulled out his right hand from inside the cloak. The demon spear Luentos pierced through the air and thousands of spears bloomed from under Jagan's feet. Chapter 264. Jagan 4. Rumbly. The underground trembled with a series of repeated vibrations that rattled the space. Startled, Rhaenyra quickly curled up into a tight ball, and she let out a surprised yelp as dust began to cascade down from the ceiling above. With both hands firmly wrapped around her head, Rhaenyra waited anxiously for the tremors to subside. Even if the ceiling collapsed and buried Rhaenyra underground, she would not die. Such a thing would obviously kill humans, and regular demon folks would be buried alive as well, but Rhaenyra was a dragon. She could easily escape if she cancelled the polymorph transformation and returned to her regular appearance. Naturally, escaping by reverting to her original form would be an extremely foolish and ignorant approach though. Moreover, although it was impossible for her to use complicated draconic spells as a hatchling, escaping from the underground with magic was something that should not pose any difficulty for her. Yet the thought of escape never even occurred to Rhaenyra. She was consumed by fear of the reverberations she felt and the sound of war coming from above. Such thoughts left her unable to think clearly or devise an escape plan, simply filling her mind with dread. Rhaenyra's already sensitive senses allowed her to have full awareness of the happenings above ground, even from a distance. In particular, as a dragon, Rhaenyra was especially sensitive to the temperament of mana unique to different existences. This gave her a profound awareness of her surroundings. The 4 divine generals were already dead, and it was probable that they had perished without a chance to even resist. In all honesty, Rhaenyra felt absolutely no pity for the 4 divine generals who had died. In fact, she found their deaths rather pleasant and enjoyable. However, what truly frightened her was the fragility of life. It had taken only a few seconds for the 4 divine generals, who had lived for centuries, to perish, reminding her that life was fleeting and delicate. "Father. Father," Rhaenyra whimpered, searching for her absent father. He barely had any memories of him. Rhyzakia, the Black Dragon, was imprinted in Rhaenyra's mind more as the lord of the Dragon Demon Castle than as a father figure. Rhaenyra had not spent enough time with her father to form any other ideas about him. Even so, Rhaenyra desperately sought out her father, the Black Dragon. At the time of Rhaenyra's birth, the Black Dragon had placed a fragment of his dragon heart inside his daughter's forehead. He had done so to ensure that she remained his possession as well as prevent her from resisting when the day came that he would force her to lay eggs and become his meal. Little did Rhaenyra know that the Black Dragon's true intentions were far from what she perceived them to be. She believed the red jewel inside her forehead was a symbol of his affection, but in reality, it was a mark of ownership. Rhaenyra couldn't help but think that a disaster like this could have been avoided if the Black Dragon had been present. Her thoughts were clouded by a sense of longing and desperation as she yearned for the Black Dragon's protection. If he had been present, she, the Dragon Duchess, would never have had to suffer humiliation like this. Rhaenyra sniffled while thinking such thoughts. Maybe, if I wish for it hard enough, the Black Dragon will hear my voice and return. It seemed like a very possible thing at the moment. Consequently, Rhaenyra gently caressed the red jewel on her forehead with continued sniffling. The agony that had ripped through her body when the intruder mercilessly struck her jewel had been almost unbearable. However, as she tentatively reached up to touch the jewel now, she found that there was almost no pain. "Oh, Black Dragon, if you can hear my voice, then please return to the Dragon Demon Castle as soon as possible," whispered Rhaenyra. Naturally, there was no response. Nevertheless, she continued to pray, her fingers caressing the red jewel on her forehead in a ritualistic manner. After a moment, she rose to her feet with a deep sigh. It wasn't a sudden surge of dignity or courage that propelled her upwards. It was simply the fact that the tremors from above had ceased. This lady cannot run away by herself. Rhaenyra's gaze drifted toward the core with a sense of despondency. It wasn't as though she felt any sense of loyalty toward the intruder who had struck her down, but she knew that she was trapped within the Dragon Demon Castle as long as the nucleus remained intact. Boom. Heek. The underground shook with even greater ferocity than before. This caused Rhaenyra to curl up into a ball once again, and her body quivered uncontrollably. The intruder had promised to return, but Rhaenyra couldn't help but wonder when exactly that would be. She knew he hadn't run away, for he was currently engaged in battle with Count Carad's vanguard above ground. The intruder is quite strong, but the enemy should be equally as strong, she thought while comparing the two. Rhaenyra was acutely aware of the fact that Count Carad's vanguard would stop at nothing to kill her, while the intruder had promised to take her away from the Dragon Demon Castle unharmed. It was clear to her that she had to side with the intruder. She knew that her father, the Black Dragon, would want nothing more than to see his daughter survive, even if it meant the fall of the Dragon Demon Castle. That means this lady doesn't need to head up there. As the tremors continued to rumble through the ground, Rhaenyra's anxious mind and racing heart began to calm. She knew that she couldn't risk heading to the surface while the battles raged on. It was simply too dangerous. Yet even as she shuddered with each new tremor, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of safety. After all, the very fact that she was experiencing these tremors meant that she was deep underground, far from harm's way. Rhaenyra knew that she would be safe until the chaos above ground subsided as long as she stayed put. This lady is extremely smart. With her decision made, Rhaenyra began to recite a draconic incantation. As her voice echoed through the underground space, a secure and unbreakable barrier began to form around her, enveloping her body in a protective cocoon. Upon feeling a sense of relief, Rhaenyra settled back into a more comfortable position, content to wait out the storm in relative safety. Spear Forest was a devastating technique that could be used while wielding the demon spear Luentos. The user of this technique could call forth a deadly forest of living black thorns to impale their enemies. Furthermore, these thorns were no ordinary plant matter but were imbued with the same demonic power as the demon spear itself, making them nearly impossible to defend against. Creak, creak. Jagan stood unwavering amid the thick thorns. His body bristled with anticipation as he watched them sprout up from the ground. Even as the countless deadly spikes converged upon him, his fur remained sharp and unyielding, deflecting their piercing blows with ease. Though the thorns were powerful enough to pierce through steel and stone, Jagan's defenses proved to be more than a match for them and kept him unharmed by redirecting their trajectory. Heh! Jagan's lips parted. Ha! Ha! Ha ha! Jagan laughed maniacally while spreading his arms. Prick. In an instant, the dense forest of spears that surrounded Jagan broke and he jumped up. Jagan reached Eugene at once and then swung his fist. Eugene vanished once more, leaving Jagan to face an empty space. Nevertheless, this peculiar phenomenon was not new to Jagan because he had witnessed it on several occasions before. As a seasoned fighter, Jagan possessed a keen sense of awareness and an extensive field of vision. He also had the instincts of a predator, enabling him to detect even the slightest movements. With his sharp senses, Jagan could discern that Eugene's inexplicable movements were a form of magic, allowing him to traverse through space at an accelerated pace. Furthermore, Eugene seemed to have the ability to hop from one of the many feathers floating in the area to another, further adding to his elusiveness. Jagan knew he couldn't keep track of all the floating feathers in Eugene's possible destinations. However, he kept most of them in his sight and relied on his keen senses, including his unique hunting sense, to chase Eugene's scent at the moment of his leap. Despite not being able to track every one of Eugene's movements, Jagan remained on the offensive and utilized his incredible speed to chase after Eugene. He made his way toward the general area where Eugene might appear and kept a keen eye out for any movement. As soon as Eugene disappeared, Jagan sprang into action. Whoosh! Eugene scattered more feathers using prominence. Then as Jagan threw his fist at Eugene, he kept an eye on the leap that Eugene had just made. Eugene was satisfied with merely diverting Jagan's attention though. After all, Eugene was still holding Luentos, and just holding the spear was sufficient for him to activate the weapon's ability. Eugene knew that to use Spear Forest to its full potential, he needed to have a complete understanding and calculation of the space around him. Luckily, Mare was already helping him with these matters. However, in the heat of the moment he didn't have to worry about such things while using prominence. Jagan was suddenly attacked by a barrage of spears erupting from the feathers that had been scattered around him. Eugene had used the feathers as coordinates for his Spear Forest technique. This allowed spears to shoot out from multiple directions, overwhelming Jagan and causing him to fall to the ground. Then Eugene materialized above Jagan, wielding the Annihilation Hammer high. The weapon held a raw and brutal strength, which originally belonged to a demon king. After the events at the Black Lion Castle, both the Annihilation Hammer and the Demon Spear came under Eugene's control, and their source of power was replaced by Eugene's mana. Eugene was currently substituting ignition with prominence. His core and heart were in stable condition, but his mana was running completely rampant, further strengthening the Annihilation Hammer. He swung down with the Annihilation Hammer. Rumbly. The blow caused the Dragon Demon Castle to tilt to one side. The force of the hammer had caused the entire castle to sink. It was clear that a piece of the Dragon Demon Castle's huge land mass would have disappeared altogether if Jagan had not held out as a buffer in the middle, absorbing the brute force contained in the blow. But Jagan's arm was now dripping with a stream of blood that gushed out like a fountain. He had used his arms to block Eugene's attack, and the amount of power in the blow he had received was tremendous. Yet the sight of his blood was a novelty to Jagan. It had been hundreds of years since he had last seen his own blood. The transformation of his gray-brown fur into a deep red was a curious sight, and he found himself captivated by it. He watched with intrigue as the blood slowly soaked into his fur. Boom. However, Eugene did not leave Jagan to revel in sentiment. He struck down once more with the Annihilation Hammer, completely destroying Jagan's arm. Boom. Jagan lurched forward with his legs bent. Boom. Now Jagan was completely pushed against the ground, and Eugene planned to completely pulverize him. Eugene struck down once more with the Annihilation Hammer, intending to completely finish Jagan. He surrounded Jagan with his feathers as well. At this moment, nothing alerted his sense of hearing. Eugene's prominence feathers served as both his coordinates and his eyes. As he spread his single wing, his senses surpassed those of any normal human, exceeding even the sixth sense. It was a new realm of perception that transcended mere senses. Yet despite the unfamiliarity of these sensations, Eugene's innate war-hardened intuition, born from a lifetime of training, remained steadfast and unswayed. Eugene was intimately familiar with the sensation that accompanied the moment when a blade was about to pierce his skin. In his earlier and less experienced days, he had been slow to react or unable to keep up with the speed of his opponents, resulting in numerous scars scattered across his body. Nevertheless, this was a story from 300 years ago. Eugene was no longer the same. After countless battles and rigorous training, his body had developed a keen sensitivity to danger, and his reflexes had been honed to a razor's edge. The sensation of a blade about to pierce his skin no longer caught him off guard, but rather, it triggered an almost instinctual response that allowed him to dodge or deflect attacks with deadly efficiency. In any case, Eugene didn't allow that sensation to distract him from the battle at hand. Instead, he pushed forward with all his might, channeling his mana into the Annihilation Hammer while summoning an army of spears from the feathers scattered around him. With a mighty leap, he disappeared through space, leaving Jagan behind to face the onslaught of weapons raining down upon him. The dark power that Eugene had felt was incredibly ominous, but he was no stranger to it. It was the same ominous feeling he had felt 300 years ago. He had also felt it from the Nur at Lahanjar. Jagan was known throughout the land as the Beast of Ravesta, a fierce and powerful creature feared by all who crossed his path. Ravesta itself was a desolate and dangerous territory, home to the reclusive Demon King of Destruction. Jagan had long been a loyal vassal of the Demon King, whom Jagan was bound to through a contract that had been passed down through his family for generations. Even Jagan's father Oberon had served the Demon King under the same agreement. As if to serve as a reminder of this, Jagan's gray-brown fur quickly became completely black. But it wasn't just his fur that had been dyed black with dark power. The color of his face had changed to a shade of black too, and even his eyes had transformed into a dark crimson color like that of blood. The full power of the Annihilation Hammer fell onto Jagan. Yet Jagan, who had been lying flat on the ground, instantaneously stood on his 2 feet and reached over his head. There was no resulting sound and nothing was even visible to the naked eye. However, an invisible force pierced through the power of the Annihilation Hammer and dissipated it. Even the numerous spears shot from the feathers could not penetrate the layer of dark power coated around Jagan. Rather, once the projectiles made contact with the invisible barrier, they corroded and scattered as dust. This was the fundamental property and power of the Vassals of Destruction. Eugene was familiar with the nature of the dark power that Jagan utilized. That ominous power would not only eat away at a person's mind but also destroy anything it came into contact with, dissipating it into nothingness. There had not been many vassals of the Demon King of Destruction during the era of 300 years ago, and none of them had been famous or special. The reason for this was simple. The Demon King of Destruction was indifferent to his vassals. He provided them with power but nothing more, not even basic protection. This was despite the fact that his ominous energy would even threaten the user, the vassal. The Vassals of Destruction were renowned for their strength, but their time in the world was often short-lived. The constant battles and wars they fought took a toll on their bodies. The very power they wielded gradually ate away at them until they finally succumbed and died through self-destruction. Eugene had been hoping to defeat Jagan before he could tap into the destructive dark power, but Jagan proved to be much more resilient than Eugene had anticipated. The battle had not gone according to Eugene's plan, and this left him in a precarious position. Jagan turned his head. His face and mouth were no longer in view due to the darkness that covered his body. However, his eyes were gazing at Eugene and they were twisted into a smile. "What an outrageous bastard," muttered Eugene with all sincerity. The stench of blood was getting thicker by the second. Eugene understood the reason behind the phenomenon he was witnessing. Jagan had enveloped himself in the dark power of destruction, a force that relentlessly ate away at his body. Nevertheless, Jagan was a beast folk, so he possessed an incredible regenerative ability, which he was using to counteract the destruction that the ominous energy wrought on his body. Despite the constant onslaught, Jagan's body was healing itself at a remarkable pace, allowing him to continue fighting with seemingly little regard for the damage he was sustaining. Still, there was a limit to Jagan's incredible regenerative ability. As the battle wore on and the dark power of destruction continued to consume his body, his regenerative power would gradually become less effective. Eventually, Jagan would reach a point of no return, unable to heal himself any longer. He would ultimately self-destruct under the weight of the destructive power that he wielded. But if it were that easy, he wouldn't have been called a beast, Eugene remarked inwardly. In addition, he had no intention of fighting a drawn-out battle. As they both charged toward each other, neither Eugene nor Jagan seemed to hold a clear advantage in terms of speed. Jagan unleashed his full power, but it did not result in any explosive increase in his velocity. Nonetheless, the battle grew increasingly challenging for Eugene. Jagan was no longer fighting like an idiot with just his bare body. He was now covered with the dark power of destruction, which destroyed anything it came into contact with. With ignition having been replaced by prominence, Eugene was able to handle the burden placed on his body with relative ease thanks to the restorative properties of the Ring of Agaroth. Though he had been cautious of Jagan's attacks before, he now had to be doubly careful to avoid coming into contact with the ominous aura that surrounded Jagan as well. However, it wasn't a huge deal. In the past, it had been a given that Eugene could die if he came into contact with the enemy. After all, demons had always been stronger and craftier than humans. Demons had to be killed over and over again, whereas humans were only given a single life. In other words, Eugene was accustomed to this process. He escaped the cage of dark power that threatened him from all sides by creating a path to liberty using the feathers of prominence. As he leaped over and over again, the single wing of purple flame emitted a brilliant light. Boom! Eugene struck Jagan with the annihilation hammer, sending him flying backward. Then Eugene healed his tattered hands while storing the annihilation hammer in his cloak. The thorns of the demon's spear emerged from thin air, holding Jagan suspended in midair. In that short moment, Eugene let go of the demon's spear and took out the dragon's spear carbos and thunderbolt pernoa. Using the feathers of prominence that were equipped with black spots, Eugene fired off a barrage of attacks. The space shook with the force of an eruption as a bolt of thunder exploded from pernoa, and the dragon's spear unleashed a mighty breath. Meanwhile, the black spots rained down upon Jagan like a meteor shower. Eugene felt an eerie sensation and he stopped his barrage without hesitation and stored his weapons. A burst of dark power suddenly cut through the barrage of mana and came at him. To avoid contact with the ominous energy, Eugene leaped to a feather. However, he chose to leap to a location that was closer to Jagan, instead of creating distance between them. Eugene followed up by drawing the holy sword and WMD from his cloak. He unleashed a flurry of strikes with the two blades and black blood gushed from Jagan's chest. Nonetheless, Jagan did not back down and instead threw his fist. With a seemingly simple punch, Jagan unleashed a tremendous force that almost seemed to rival even the powerful strikes of Molan. The dark power that accompanied the attack was equally devastating, sweeping through everything in its path with a destructive force. Despite the fact that Eugene had imbued durability into the feathers that he unleashed with prominence, they were still no match for the full power of the dark power of destruction. The feathers that Eugene had scattered earlier were completely destroyed in a single blow. Regardless, this was nothing for him to worry about. Eugene could simply scatter more feathers. Consequently, he carried out his plan with a flap of his single wing. The embers of his purple flame transformed into feathers before scattering into the surroundings. When Jagan threw another punch, Eugene retreated and used the scattered feathers of prominence to create distance between them. Jagan was quick to follow, though, and he roared as he closed in on Eugene. Boom, boom, boom. Before long, the two of them had moved all the way to the city from the castle. The city lay in ruins with its tall buildings reduced to rubble. Demon folks and demonic beasts roamed the streets, feeding on their own kind amid the carnage. The sight was horrific, but it only served to fuel Eugene's determination. Eugene turned around, no longer lengthening his distance from Jagan. Instead, he charged at Jagan with a flash of lightning that accelerated him further. Jagan stopped and stared intently as Eugene flew toward him. He had already identified the locations of the feathers, and there were no more feathers behind and around Jagan that Eugene could use as points of teleportation. However, Jagan didn't believe that the human was simply charging at him from the front like an idiot. He could see that Eugene was scattering more feathers as he accelerated, so Jagan had to prepare himself to chase after the disappearing prey. Eugene knew that he would die if a blow landed. He had a strong hunch regarding this. It was rather fortunate that he'd had a chance to fight with Molan before this battle against Jagan. Perhaps it was because Eugene had experienced the ridiculous power of his comrade through a beating, but he felt that Jagan's absurd power was rather meek. Due to being quite accustomed to facing such ridiculous power, Eugene did not panic and he wasn't nervous either. When Jagan launched his attack, Eugene remained unfazed, moving exactly as he had intended at that moment. Rather than leaping to a feather as he had done before, Eugene coordinated the acceleration of the thunderbolt and twisted his body to evade Jagan's strike. Thing. Eugene swiftly and deftly executed a series of blows on Jagan's arm with the holy sword and Wei as he passed by Jagan. In the blink of an eye, Eugene spun around and used both of his swords to decapitate his enemy. Jagan's head was severed from his body and sent flying into the air. His eyes were wide open with a look of shock and disbelief as he stared at Eugene. "I cut off your father's head several times too," said Eugene with a smirk as he moved past Jagan. Jagan did not understand Eugene's words, but he didn't care to do so. Rather, he raged as this was the first time he had been decapitated. Kook. Jagan didn't return the smug smile. He didn't have the mood to do so. Jagan was getting frustrated and annoyed that the hunt wasn't going his way, and he was furious that his head had been cut off. His pure intent to kill was now contaminated with hatred and malice, producing an evil energy. The power of destruction bent to Jagan's malice, creating what seemed like a huge tidal wave. Even though Jagan remained motionless, an endless wave of dark power swept through the space. Meanwhile, the holy sword in Eugene's hand emitted a brilliant light to protect its wielder. Fwa! The remains of the dragon demon castle disappeared completely. No, rather, the entirety of the castle ground was gone. Eugene stopped in midair, staring dumbfoundedly at the scene before him while taking note of the ring of Agaroth. His minor injuries began to quickly regenerate. "My God," said Eugene with an astonished smile. What remained after the tornado of black power engulfed almost everything was simply wriggling chunks of meat, and those wriggling chunks were Jagan. The explosion of dark power had completely destroyed his body, and it was now in the process of regeneration. However, Jagan wasn't being regenerated in his original form. Rather, the result of the regeneration was a body that was much bigger and more vicious than before. With it, the ominous feeling of destruction grew even stronger. Eugene shook his head while stifling a nauseous feeling. Kaya! He suddenly heard a shrill scream coming from below at this moment. Rhaenyra had not been intending to exit the underground until everything had concluded. She had planned to stay inside her safe sanctuary and wait for the storm to pass, and indeed that was what she had done. Rhaenyra had done nothing else, but even so the land above her had casually disappeared.